Daryl, thank you so much for making time. Before we get into it, I got my jersey on. You got your jersey on. Thank you so much. One quick note, and then we really will get to it. And I rarely score goals in my very old guy bad hockey player league, but I did in this jersey on Monday. So
Did you? Oh, that's amazing. I love it.
say, as an American that lives in Toronto, my league is pretty bad. But and I never know when I score. I actually usually have to ask the goalie if I've scored. In this case, I actually knew, so it was a pretty good goal. Um, Daryl, this week New Hampshire was all over the cannabis news.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get sort of the full recap of, let's say, beginning of the year to now. But the bottom line is legalization is not happening this year in New Hampshire. What got us to that as of Thursday?
Sure. Starting back early year, HB 1633 was actually a free market bill built upon the foundation of the one the year before it. And the rumor was the Senate was going to send down kind of a state control, what they're calling a franchise model. That never really arrived. So the sponsors took their bill and actually stretched it to what they called an agency model. We have some of these liquor stores and markets they don't want to deal with, so they just kind of license them out as agency stores. But stretched it as far as they could to satisfy the governor's concerns without crossing that line where the government is in the business, in the plant touching activities. And we really felt that they did that. So that version of the bill got out of the House. That was the compromise bill as far as everyone was concerned. And when it got to the Senate literally did a delete all and replace with the franchise kind of state takeover model. But it didn't stop there. It got even worse because the Senate president does not want legalization. So what he did is then took it a step further and larded it up with as many poison pills as he possibly could to put the state of New Hampshire in a lose-lose situation when it got back to the House. So that bill came back to the House. That version of a state control model had already been rejected by the House, I think at least 2 or 3 times in this session. And the House said, we're not letting this happen. We don't like it, and voted it down in a big way. There was a second smaller vote that said, but let's not kill it yet. And then another vote that said, let's have the Senate and the House see if they can negotiate in what they call a committee of conference to see if we can get rid of some of this stuff. Unfortunately, that negotiation wasn't as robust a negotiation. In our opinion, everything around the governor's red line should have been up for discussion and negotiation and change. And all they got was a little bit of language for the ATCs to have some sort of path to for-profit and franchise. 1 was a technical tweak, and then 3 were things like increasing decrim from 3/4 of an ounce to an ounce because it's not really going to be legalized till 2026, and a couple other small things that really weren't red lines or even big issues for anybody. And so unfortunately, that underwhelming change ended up going back to the House for a vote yesterday, and something kind of amazing happened. The bill actually never got voted on. There were 2 people who came up and said a few words for and against, and then one of the reps came up and said, I want to do a motion to table the bill, and that motion passed. I don't think anyone expected that. And then there was a motion to pull it off the table, and that failed by even a larger margin than the motion to table it passed. So that's where our legalization and all the effort of all the people that was put into this ended with. And I don't think it's necessarily a surprise. I've been saying for weeks now that if the Senate sends back that version of the bill to the House, I was very skeptical that they were going to pass it. And I think that proven to be right.
You looked into the crystal ball and saw the future a couple of weeks back for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question is, where does that leave New Hampshire right now? I mean, the context in which New Hampshire is operating has not changed, right? All surrounding states are still legal and growing, like the markets are still growing. And folks in New Hampshire still can go to those states and buy it legally. And I think there's overwhelming support for legalization in New Hampshire, yet we are at the same place now as we were at the beginning of the legislative session. So what does that portend for the future? And maybe roll in some of the context around the political, right? Because you have you're going to correct me, but a lame duck governor. And is this the Senate president also not running again?
He's retiring. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. So let's first talk about the lose-lose situation. If you pass this bill, you have what Representative Hunt described as the ugliest, most government intrusive, bill you can have. things like medical patients going from 0% tax to 15%. I mean, it was just so many bad things in this bill. And in our opinion, it would probably take decades to fix it. You'd have one major bite at the apple in the next legislative session where you had to fix everything that was wrong with that before the hooks are in too deep. And you may be putting the Liquor Commission on another 100-year march just to taking it over slowly anyway. So many bad things. And on the other hand, if we don't legalize, now we don't have legalization. We potentially could have a hostile governor coming in. We do have at least 2 Senate seats opening up that were anti-cannabis, but who knows who's going to win those seats. So I'm going to make the statement right now, and I think everybody needs to focus on this in the upcoming session, that the fight has always really been in the Senate. The House has been very representative of the people, and I think all of the votes this year on this cannabis bill reflect that. But what we truly need is a veto-proof majority of senators who are willing to stand up against power and party and pressure and say, I don't care if you take away my committee assignments. I don't care if you take away funding from my party. We are putting a good to great bill on the governor's desk every single year. And if you veto it, we're going to override that veto. And that's the only way it's going to get done. So this election is going to be important. We do need more pro-cannabis candidates, but we've done that before only to watch them fold at the last minute. And we can't have that again. So until we have that, I think the House's position should be, we're not sending you anything but the best bills, because you're probably either going to vote it down anyway or create another lose-lose situation or create a bill so horrendous that even pro-legalization people are standing up and saying this cannot be allowed to stand. Because if you're going to deliver cannabis legalization without economic opportunity for the people, only cater to what the state can profit from it and the wealthy and connected to get in, then the state of New Hampshire is saying we'd rather have the status quo.
It's a lot. And can I just a little civics course here for just for folks who are not as familiar with New Hampshire governance, really. The House is massive, 400 something people. And the state is, well, the state is relatively small. The House is massive and the Senate is tiny.
24.
Right? So it's like it's a handful of people, to my view, right, standing in the way of good legalization measures that happen to be state senators in New Hampshire.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, when the initial bill came to the Senate, we were really hoping that the Democrats, because there was about 9 of them that the Republicans needed, would have said to the Republicans, listen, we understand you're going to kill our bill. We want you to know we're going to kill your version of the bill. So now is the time for us to get together and iron out where the red lines are being crossed that the governor hasn't been public about and figure something out that's really good. And instead, you got this absolute monstrosity that came out of the Senate that was so unpalatable to everybody that the House rejected it by a huge margin when it came in. And I thought that was a telling statement, because there were many who believed, well, it's probably going to be 51-49 either way. It wasn't. It wasn't even close, not in the ballpark, not in the galaxy.
Yeah. So there's broad support in the House for let's call it a good bill or a great bill. Mm-hmm. There's little support for anything like that right now in the Senate. The current governor, I think he would have been a reluctant signee of whatever came to his desk, I think, right?
I think that's pretty accurate.
But I also believe, and I want to ask you, like a vast majority of New Hampshire residents agree that legalization should happen, probably like nationwide as well. They may even outpace the rest of the country. Yeah. So what does that mean for you and the New Hampshire Cannabis Association for the work that you're doing now and into the future? And what should the industry know about it?
Yeah, so we're going to continue to fight for the people. You know, this is an interesting thing, because there's a lot of organizations that advocate for legalization. We're the only organization that has no paymasters. Nobody gives us $1 and tells us what to say or what to support. And so I think we have a unique viewpoint, because we do talk to the people and find out what they want. And economic opportunity is at the top of that list. So the work begins anew. I think we need a new, more New Hampshire-centric coalition to help push this. Some of the organizations involved seem to not care if there was 100 to 200 years of devastation left behind, so long as they could check New Hampshire off and move on to another state. Mm-hmm. So we need to fight against that. And I think maybe it's on 2 or 3 fronts. I'd like to see not only a legalization bill, again, good to great. I think we need to work on the Senate and really bring them into the sunlight so everybody can see really what the issues are here. I think we also need to increase the decrim and improve that, so that in the meantime, you get some relief for those people who may be running afoul. For anybody that doesn't know, New Hampshire's genius idea was to legalize 3/4 of 1 ounce. In Massachusetts, if you go down, they call it, do you want a granite stater? Because you can't even get an ounce.
Oh, are you serious?
I'm dead serious. I'm dead serious. And then I think, we should start looking at maybe getting the ATCs a path to for-profit status now instead of waiting, because an interesting thing is about to happen with federal rescheduling. And although that won't bring the state and the federal government into parity, it could be putting big pharma on a path to be able to cultivate, transport across state lines, and sell at any pharmacy with a prescription for, say, general wellness. So now you may have a national kind of competitor moving in where every pharmacy could be a distribution point. So while we're working on the good to great bill in the Senate to see if we can pass it, I think there's other steps we need to be taking to improve the situation for the residents of New Hampshire.
Let me ask you a question. This is, I don't know if it's a softer question, but more sort of on the ground type of question, especially about the House. When we spoke before, both offline but also online, with the author and the co-authors, co-sponsors of the bills, they were encouraged by the bipartisan nature in the House of what was coming forward, and it sounds like actually throughout. I mean, the House is pretty united on this. It sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they? I guess encouraged by the support, but discouraged about the progress? Like, what is their path forward as well in terms of their eagerness to keep taking this on and taking slings and arrows from their Senate colleagues?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a matter of fatigue. A lot of people worked really, really hard, and we applaud them for that. It's important to note that we thought this would fail if it came back, because even when they started stretching to that agency model, they were losing votes in the House already.
Right.
So, but the encouraging thing is, right now it's the day after. I think everybody needs to breathe, but we're already hearing rumblings that there are some people who want to pick up the torch in the House and start with the foundations of 639 and 1633, the two previous bills as they were crafted. And so we're encouraged by that. And I think it's going to be part of that, putting together a new coalition. I think a lot of people really understand this a lot better in the legislature now after the conversations that were had this year. And so hopefully they're able to really kind of see through the poison pills and bills and where not to go, and why the government's hands and plant touching activities are wrong for so many reasons, and why, if anybody says it's okay to tax medical patients, the answer is always no. Right. So things like that. So
they get it. So while the eventual outcome is where we were at the beginning of the year, the education has taken leaps and bounds from legislators and probably the public and others as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's hard to see that as like massive progress the day after, but certainly you start the next session way ahead of where you were in the previous session and the previous session.
I think so. And I will tell you this, the residents of the state of New Hampshire impressed me, because I would contact, people, and they would be telling me what I'm already thinking in my head. Right. Which means they saw what was going on. They diagnosed the dire problems about this, and that they rejected it. So they're starting to get that information and understand that not every type of legalization is the same.
Yeah. Well, Daryl, thank you so much for the work that you and the team do, and for the support of folks in the House and the few, I would imagine, in the Senate. But thank you for the work that you do. And as we talked about before we came on, I hope to see you in Manchester, New Hampshire, later this summer, and we'll be announcing that and bringing some of that to the good folks in the Cultivated world. So, Daryl, thanks so much for your time, and get some rest this weekend.
Always happy to be here, my friend. Look forward to your visit.
Awesome.